You're still going to do like 5 on the hands? Okay, yeah. Welcome to Stochastic NFL live before lock for Monday Night Football. We got the Jaguars. We got the Bengals. No Joe Burrow. Sadly, we don't get the marquee matchup of Joe Burrow versus Trevor Lawrence, but still, should be a fun Monday Night Football game. Hopefully. I'm your host, Neil Orfield. You can find me on Twitter at PlayerQDFS. I'm here with Matt Bellman. You can find him on Twitter at Fantasy Tips Matt. This show is produced by Jordan Klein, who you can find on Twitter at Jordan D. Klein. And the show is sponsored by Owner's Box. If you've watched our shows, you've heard us talk about Owner's Box a little bit before, but can constantly find Overlay on Owner's Box. It's a super flex format for the standard contest. Of course, tonight it is a showdown contest, but looking at a lot of Overlay consistently on Owner's Box. If you sign up using our link for Owner's Box, you're going to get your first deposit matched up to $500 over time. Not immediate. You don't get the money immediately, but you get it over time as you play. On top of that, you get two $5 entries into different tournaments. You get a ticket to a lightning lineups contest, which is like a cash game, and then whatever else kind of lineup you want to play. Fantastic deal. Check it out if you haven't already checked out Owner's Box. Of course, if you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. You must be 21 plus to play in most places. Matt, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. Happy to be on here with you as always. I was thinking about this before and going to say I'm happy to be able to hopefully redeem myself after some not great takes on the Bears-Vikings Monday night game, which I was going to say was a few weeks ago, but it was actually last week. So
it was 1 week ago.
Yeah,
I don't remember you having bad takes. Oh,
well, yeah. We just both like the Vikings. I mean, it was one of those slates where the Vikings came in really high owned as they should, and you got a lot of leverage playing the Bengals. Playing the Bears. Similar slate tonight with the Bengals and Jaguars. I had a little Freudian slip there in terms of who I kind of like tonight, but it should be a fun game, as you mentioned.
Well, I'm a Vikings homer, so that's my excuse. What's your excuse for liking the Vikings last week? I mean, come on, Matt.
I know. I even said it on the show. Like, I was a firm non-Josh Dobbs believer. You know, the Browns gave up on him real early, but then I just bought into the hype a little bit. He was not good. He wasn't as bad as his stat line, like, laid out with all those tip balls becoming interceptions, but sure. I captained him, had no chance there. You needed the Bears. I mean, it was an ugly game all the way around. It was one of those where, like, the Bears dominated, but if the Vikings could have scored one more touchdown, like, it would have changed the whole complexion of the slate because the Bears could not score.
It was such an ugly, that was the worst game. Here's the worst part. So I was at a bar last week. I remember I went to the bar with some friends, actually going out with the same friends tonight because one of them is actually a Jaguars fan. But 3 minutes left in the game. The one who is a Jaguars fan has sort of also adopted the Vikings as his team. 3 minutes left in the game. He says, man, I can't believe the Vikings won this game. It was a 1-point game with 3 minutes left. It was already like second or third down. I was like, what the hell are you doing? Now, I'm not somebody who believes in jinxes, so I wasn't that mad. But I was like, what are you talking about? We won this 1-point game with 3 minutes left. Yeah,
I'm not a jinx person either.
Yeah,
I'm not a jinx person either, but there's etiquette. There's, sports etiquette. And that you just can't do it.
So I already told him this week, early in the game, if the Jaguars ever have a lead, I'm going to say, I can't believe the Jaguars won this game. All right, we should probably, I guess, get into this slate a little bit because this is a short slow. This is the shortest slow that you've ever been on, I know, Matt. So we got to get right into it, and we'll start with the quarterbacks. Who do you like at the quarterback position? How are you correlating your quarterbacks, if you are at all? Are you captaining them? Start with whichever quarterback you want to talk about first.
Both quarterbacks look good, kind of from different angles. Lawrence is not an elite quarterback, but he's like on that next level below. The Jaguars are really good. They're not like an elite team, but they're the next level below. He looks really good here. Browning also looks good from more of a low ownership, cheap perspective. Not often you get quarterbacks under 9K that aren't getting like a ton of love. I mean, he's going to be 37%, let's say, in the utility, about 7% or 8% in captain. So less than 50% of the field is going to roster Browning here, whereas Lawrence is going to be one of the higher owned players on the slate. Both of them look really, really good, just from different angles for me. Like in cash games, the priority is Lawrence. In GBPs, I think you can get away from playing Lawrence just because there are a bunch of good plays on this slate. How do you see it?
Yeah, I see it, I think, largely the same way. I mean, Lawrence, I wouldn't say it's like, I'm not going to be getting away from Trevor Lawrence too much. He's going to be in probably over 70% of my lineups, I think. So like, I'm not getting, even in GPPs, which is all I play, I'm not getting too far away from Trevor Lawrence, but I think you laid it out perfectly. Like, they are both great plays in their own way. Lawrence is I believe, the top projected play on the entire slate. And then Browning is just going to go a little bit overlooked. And where do we have? We have Browning at under 7% capped ownership, under 36% util ownership. We actually don't have massive positive leverage there, but he's a quarterback on a 1-game slate. Definitely a lot of interest in both of them. I just got a notification that my battery saver is on, so I need to plug in my computer, Matt, before I leave you here by yourself. But yeah, no, I am 100% with you on the quarterbacks. I didn't realize that I had unplugged my computer apparently.
You're
So
okay.
I'm gonna while I find my charger, I'm gonna throw it back to you for actually tell me about your correlations. Are you if you're playing a quarterback at captain, how many pass catchers are you requiring with them in a GPP?
Well, with Lawrence, I think you probably want at least 2, just because of the size of the slate. He can run, so I don't think you have to play more than 2, but he's not like a Lamar Jackson where you expect, multiple rushing touchdowns. He can get that, but you don't expect it. Browning, at least 2. The thing about Browning for me and what I like about him is his target tree is so secure and so small with Chase and Higgins, presuming Higgins is healthy, eating up so many of the targets. So with Browning, I think you only need 2 also, just because he's got 2 guys that really stand out. With Lawrence, you've got also 2 really good wideouts, but then other guys that are more viable. For me, the interesting part of this slate, if you just play it just straight projections and don't change anything around, most lineups are going to be like 4-2 Jacksonville, 5-1 even. I was looking at some stuff earlier that had close to 60% of the field playing 5-1 Jacksonville lineups. Like, I get it. 10-point favorite. They look really good. But Cincinnati is not a bad team. Like, I know they're missing Burrow, but the AFC North is really good. I know they didn't put out a great effort yesterday with Pittsburgh losing to Arizona and Cleveland losing on the road, but still a really good division. Like, I'm not going to be surprised at all if the Bengals are in this game, even if they win this game. I'm not making some hot take that I expect that to happen, but it's the NFL, man. I mean, we've seen a lot crazier every week pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. It would not be that shocking to see the Bengals pull this one off. Yeah, it's good breakdown there. I just realized we did get a super chat already. Thank you. Nicholas Lynn asked 20 max. How many captains would you play in a 20 max? So if you're playing 20 lineups in a 20 max contest, how many different captains would you play? Do you have an answer for this, Bellman?
Probably, like, that's a risk tolerance question. So I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. For me, it would be like probably no more than 5. But anywhere probably from like 3 to 5. I probably wouldn't go like all in on 1 or 2 guys, but I could see myself going like, heavy on 2 guys and then sprinkling another guy in. So, I would say anywhere up to 5 personally, but I don't like to just spread it out so much where I'm having a different captain in each lineup personally.
Yeah, so I think I'm about the same as you, like in terms of how many I would want. You could play the same captain every single lineup. That's just taking on a lot of risk. If you do that, you could spread it out, have a different captain in each one. I'm with you. I'd probably want to have, 4 of each captain, whatever is probably where I'd probably end up. It's not something that I actually set for like I don't set a like this is exactly how many I want, but I typically set my limit when I'm playing a lot of lineups at 20% for each player, which will force you to have at least 5 different captains. If I were playing just 20, maybe you could, raise that limit a little bit.
There's so much different nuance to it. Like, let's say you wanted to play the $50 single entry and you love someone at captain, but you didn't really know how you wanted to build with it. Instead of playing the $50 single, you could play the $3 20 max, basically the same price, use that captain all 20 times and just fill out the lineups differently. So again, it's a hard question to answer unless like we knew personally, like your playing style, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, there's no right answer, but I think I'm with you. Probably somewhere in the like 4 to 7 range. Different captains is probably what I would play. Try to get a couple of each, most likely. All right, let's move on to running backs. So let's start with the Jaguar side. How you feeling about ETN? You playing any Dearness Johnson, Tank Bigsby? What are you doing with the Jags running backs?
Tank Bigsby looks really hard to play, just considering his workload right now, or non-existent workload. I think you're only playing Tank Bigsby in like Jacksonville onslaughts where you think they roll and he gets work at the end. I get it. I'm not playing that way. If I were playing 150, I'd probably have some shares of that. I'll go to the top first or top after that and then talk about Dearness after. So ETN looks good here. I mean, he gets a ton of carries. He's the second highest projected player on the slate, and he's not going to pull as much ownership as like Trevor Lawrence. I'm pulling up those numbers right now to see if they updated in terms of ownership. We saw it like,
ETN.
yeah, he's right behind Lawrence. So we saw, it's not like you're getting leverage on him, but we saw it a bunch like in the middle of the season where he was the one scoring touchdowns and Lawrence wasn't getting there. Wouldn't be crazy to think that happens tonight. I think playing them together makes sense. Not even like the Lawrence to ETN combo. They could just easily both get there on their own. Like Lawrence throws 2 touchdowns, ETN scores once and gets a bunch of yards receiving and rushing. So ETN looks really, really good here. D'Ernest also looks good from like a cheap value guy that you know is going to play snaps. Like he's not the safest play in the world. And if he doesn't score, you probably don't need him. But if he does score, you probably do need him. And he's viable, like if you just get to like that 50-yard mark. So I think D'Ernest is definitely playable. Would not someone I'd be like building around, but certainly playable. And I think playing them both together is viable. I mean, especially with Jacksonville, the huge favorite here.
Yeah, I'm with you. Totally viable. Yeah, D'Ernest Johnson is 4,200, so it's like it's a little bit cost prohibitive to play both of them, but I'm with you that you absolutely could, and just hope that they run all over the Bengals. If you look at like DVOA, run DVOA, the Bengals have been awful against the run. If you look at schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed per game, they're actually decent against the run. So it's hard to read the advanced stats on how they actually do against the run. But it wouldn't be that shocking to see the Jaguars have a lot of success running on this Bengals defense. D'Ernest Johnson, he's sort of interesting because he played a season high in snaps last game. In week 12, D'Ernest Johnson played 39% of snaps. It's unclear to me if that was just because of ETN's rib injury. Like ETN has been struggling with a rib injury. Maybe they're limiting his snaps a little bit, and D'Ernest Johnson has been benefiting as a result. But it's at the very least, I think D'Ernest Johnson has clearly become the running back 2 for the Jaguars. Just looking through the recent game logs, week 10 played 21% of snaps to Tank Bigsby's 18%. Week 11, 24% to Bigsby's 14%. And then week 12 just completely owned the role, 39% to Bigsby, 3% snap share. So D'Ernest Johnson, pretty clear the running back 2. Are you factoring in ETN's rib injury? Like he was limited in practice for a lot of last week. Are you at all concerned like with playing ETN as a result of that? Or do you like either D'Ernest Johnson or Bigsby better as a result of, the fact that ETN seems to be nursing a rib injury a little bit?
I think that it could definitely make you bump a D'Ernest a little bit more, even if it just, causes him to miss, a couple snaps. I mean, it's whatever, it's a showdown slate. That's a boost to D'Ernest. Doesn't really make me less interested in ETN because ultimately in tournaments, I'm looking for upside, and that doesn't really have, his upside isn't changed. And if other people are worried about that, then, he's going to be less owned.
True.
The other thing about D'Ernest, and this doesn't matter, but he's like good. I don't know if you remember the showdown slate a couple of years ago for the Browns when Chubb and Hunt were out. Right. Yep. He smashed. Like he was the guy getting all the lead work. That's basically the only game he's ever been that guy. So like if he gets his opportunity, he's a guy that can be really good. Again, you're not expecting like a big workload here. It's almost like Andre Drummond in the sense that like he's not going to play a lot, but when he plays, he's going to be productive. It's not quite that extreme because he's not guaranteed to be productive at all, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that's a really good analogy. Like he's probably not going to play a ton, but when he does, he could smash in that time. Obviously not quite to the extent of Andre Drummond, but yeah, totally understand what you're saying there. What about so let's move over to the Bengals side. Clearly Joe Mixon, the RB1. He's just 7,000, really low price tag on Joe Mixon tonight. Are you playing any Mixon, and are you playing any of the backups behind Mixon?
Mixon's probably my favorite play on the slate. I hate saying that, but like he's, a lot of people say he's dust now. He's not really good anymore. I get it. But when I was doing the early morning show with Spags, and someone made I can't even remember, like Derrick Henry or someone was dust, or might've been with Greg actually on an NBA show. Like we're not talking about like starting our franchise with Joe Mixon here. We're just talking about playing him on a showdown slate, and he's coming in with some of the highest leverage on the slate. I'm buying it. Oftentimes I talk about like ownership is going to be, and we've seen it recently, even yesterday, where ownership is a lot higher than guys than projected. Mixon's not going to be that guy here. People don't want to play him. They're big dogs. If since he's successful tonight, like I think Mixon has a big game, and he's one of those true bell cows. Like, he's going to get a ton, if not all of the carries, be involved in the passing game. Was called out a little bit last week because of his effort. Again, I'm not like a Mixon stan at all. I don't think he's very good, but I like him a lot tonight, just from a pure game theory perspective.
Yeah, it's a 1-game slate. He's also just cheap, like point per dollar.
So
he
cheap.
looks like a really solid play on this slate. Yeah, makes a lot of sense to go to some Mixon.
Part of me wishes he were more expensive because I just like the idea of playing him anyways. That said, he's still not pulling like a ton of ownership. I know like he'd be out obviously less owned, but he's still not going to be like 40% owned. So I dig it.
Yeah. The funny thing with Mixon is, so this is the Jaguars defensive coordinator came out a few weeks ago at this point and said that they wanted to force teams to throw on them. So part of me is like, are they gonna like just load the box against Mixon and force the Bengals to throw on them? That's maybe a slight concern, but that's also going to be reflected in all of the advanced stats. And the Jaguars have given up the 15th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to running backs over the past 5 weeks. So it's accounted for in that even if they are forcing teams to throw on them, they're still kind of a middling run defense anyway. Are you playing any of the other Cincinnati running backs?
I mean, I think like kind of in the Tank Bigsby mold, like Travion Williams, this game gets out of hand. Like him and Chase Brown are combined 600. So, I think I'd go Travion over him. We saw a really cheap tight end score last night. In 150 max, I'd probably be sprinkling at least Travion in, but no one I feel like good about at all. I think, they're only really getting work, obviously, if Mixon gets hurt, which could happen to anyone, or if this is just a route. And I don't really see that.
Yeah, it's a little bit tough just looking through. Let's see. The past 2 games, Trayvon Williams played 24 snaps. Nobody else played more. Chris Evans played 1. He's not even active for this game. So yeah, over the past 2 total games, 24 snaps, only 2 carries in those games for Trayvon Williams. Has run routes on 23% of dropbacks, hasn't even seen a target. So it's a pretty thin play. It's more of a contingent play than anything. Like if Mixon gets hurt, maybe in a blowout, he'll add some value, but in a regular game script, he's just not out there enough to pay off his salary. So yeah, it's a tough ask there. Anything else you want to say about running backs?
No, I think it's pretty straightforward.
All right, wide receivers. Let's start with the Bengals side. Obviously, no longer have Joe Burrow throwing them the ball. Changes everything for these Bengals. We also have not seen Browning with all of the receivers healthy. What are you doing with these Bengals receivers?
Browning is such an unknown. It's like hard to know exactly what to do with the Bengals receivers. They're huge dogs here. They're good. They're really good, especially Chase. Obviously, he's one of the top probably 3 guys in the league. Higgins is on that next tier. I like them here. Like they don't project as well as the Jacksonville guys. I think the Jacksonville guys come in higher owned just because they project better for their prices. But I like the pivot to the Cincy guys. Really, this game's interesting. At least the wide receivers are. You've got 4 really good guys, 2 for each team. You've got Higgins and Chase, obviously, and then Kirk and Ridley. They all look really good, and it's really hard for me to differentiate between any of them, to be quite honest. Higgins being the obviously lowest priority and the most unknown coming back from injury, but his upside is just as high as any of them.
Yeah, that's the weird thing with Higgins. Like people are asking me because I write my article and I do like, here are the studs, the top projected plays. Here are the best point per dollar plays. Here are the low owned plays. And I didn't write up Higgins because he doesn't fall into any of those buckets. He's not a very good point per dollar play. Doesn't really have that great of a projection, but we all know he has the upside to put up 100 and a touchdown or 2 touchdowns. So it's a tough spot for Higgins. Kind of gets lost in the shuffle for me, even though I know he has that upside. I think I'm actually coming in a little bit underweight to the field on Higgins. It's also the Jaguars have been worse against slot receivers this year, just looking at, or at least the most recent 5 games, looking at their schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to slot receivers. They're like one of the worst teams in the league, or at least worse than they are against other receivers, which makes me Chase a little bit better, makes me like Boyd a little bit better. Both play a little bit more slot, but doesn't really benefit Higgins. So he's kind of getting lost in the shuffle for me. Certainly could make me regret it as far as the Bengals go. I feel like I'm like I don't know why I like Zay Jones so much, but I'm really intrigued by Zay Jones as somebody who just hasn't really gotten it done recently, but we know that he has the upside to completely break a slate. I said this in my article, and I don't usually add little notes like this, but it kind of seems to me like a slate where you don't really need to go to the really far off the board plays. I will in some lineups, but just because you've got like Boyd and Zay Jones coming in sub 20% ownership, and they both look really good to me. And for whatever reason, Zay Jones stands out to me a little bit more. What is your level of interest in these wide receiver threes?
Yeah, that's the clear third tier with Zay Jones and Tyler Boyd. I don't love either of them. Probably Zay Jones more than Boyd, just because presumably Jacksonville has the ball more, clearly the better quarterback, etc. We've seen Lawrence like Jones a lot. So I also prefer Jones to Boyd. Again, Boyd outscoring him wouldn't shock me, but I do think Jones is likelier to score a touchdown, just considering Jacksonville's, gonna most likely score more points here. Just touching back on Higgins, I agree with you. He's fallen through the cracks. I don't think you're the only one he's falling through the cracks with. Like, it's interesting. Given our tools right now, he looks like a really negatively leveraged play. Only optimal 16% of the time, coming in with about 21% ownership. But what if that ownership's 12%? You know what I mean? Then like this is just projected numbers. So I'm not saying it's gonna be, but I do think guys like specifically Evan Ingram, even Kirk and Ridley are going to take ownership from Higgins. People want to play the Jacksonville side here, just what it is.
That's a really good point. Like, it would not be that shocking to see Higgins come in lower owned than we're anticipating, just because anybody who's using an optimizer, like, he's not popping unless you do something to get more Higgins. So it
It's
could be that he ends up getting a little bit lost in the shuffle.
it's exactly what you said about what you wrote about. Like, he just doesn't fit any of those categories. He doesn't project really well. He's also kind of expensive, so he's just going to fall through the cracks on these type of slates.
Yep. And I'm currently letting him fall through. I also have not submitted my last, so maybe I'll up it a little bit. I'm getting to some, so I don't want to make it sound like I'm not playing any T Higgins. I have 13% currently, so but below the field currently. And if he does end up at 12%, I'm gonna feel foolish for having 13%. At that point, I'd rather have like 40% Higgins if I knew he was going to be 12%. But currently we have him projected for 20 some percent overall, and I'm okay being a little bit under the field there. Anything else that you want to say? Or are you playing any Trent Irwin, Tim Jones, Andre Yoshevitz, any of these other receivers?
No, the Cincinnati guys are like out of play now that Higgins is back for me. Like,
Yep.
in 150, same. I think you can take shots, but I also wouldn't hate just not playing them. Like, Irwin isn't expensive, but he's also not super cheap for now, no defined role. I'd probably play Yeshivas over him just because of the price difference, although Irwin will probably play a little bit more, but really no interest here. And then Jacksonville, just it's really hard to want to get anywhere on Jacksonville besides their top three, and then Evan Ingram, who we'll obviously talk about coming up.
I think I slightly prefer Irwin over Yoshevitz if I were going to play one. Just they're both pretty thin plays. Just looking to the last games that Higgins played in the last two, Irwin played in week 8 and week 9, 27% of snaps and then 20%. But I guess Yoshevitz was not that far behind him at 16% and 13%. And as you say, Yoshevitz is a little bit cheaper, 600. Irwin's at 1800. So honestly, yeah, they're like the price is price adjusted. They're actually pretty similar plays given their role. Neither of them is likely to hit. If one of them scores a touchdown, you're probably going to want to have them. But neither of them is actually out on the field all that often. So I think I have a slight preference for Irwin. Sounds like you have a slight preference for Yoshevitz. But in any case, neither of them is making it into my lineup if I'm playing 20 lineups. It's probably once I get to like 50 lineups is where I start playing these guys. Definitely have sprinkles if I have 150. But yeah, I'm playing 30 lineups tonight, not playing either of any of these. I'm only playing the top 3 receivers for each team currently.
I get that. And I just want to say, I do, if you were just asking me who I think outscores, I would say Irwin. I just think again, if you have 1800 left, I wouldn't play Yeshivas over him. But like it is like, it's weird because like, this is one where, yeah, it is like, he's only a third of Irwin's salary, but it's also only $1,200, which isn't that hard to make up on a showdown site. So I see it both ways, really.
Yep, exactly. All right, tight ends. So this is, I think we got to start with Evan Ingram. I think he's going to be he's a big part of my lineups currently. I think I'm going to leave it that way. I really like Evan Ingram tonight. He's also getting a lot of ownership here. Let's start with Evan Ingram. What are you doing with Ingram tonight?
Oh, he's one of the best plays on the slate. I mean, he's too cheap. He's been really productive. He just hasn't gotten in the end zone. And again, whenever you have guys like that, I think it's even fair to boost them a little bit just because the touchdown regression should presumably come. That said, I think the industry is way under projecting him as far as ownership. I know we have him at like 35% right now. In the higher dollar stuff, and again, maybe in the $15 or whatever he does come in, 35-40% owned, but in like the 3-entry max, single max stuff, I think he's like 60% owned. So just know that going in. I still think he's a really good play, but it changes like what type of play he is. And again, I'm not saying that that's definitely going to happen, but that's in the realm for me, like a real realm.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think that, so I only play the large field stuff, and I do think that he's probably not going to get to like 60% in the large field stuff. I hope he doesn't.
I agree.
Because I love him. But you're right. Like in the once you get into the higher dollar stuff or just smaller field stuff in general, I could see Ingram getting steam just because the price tag, like 6,200, he's third on the Jaguars in route participation over the past 2 weeks. Also has 14 targets over the past 2 weeks. Some people will point to the fact like they haven't really used him in the red zone, and that's true. You want to like keep in mind the trends, what the team likes to do, but it's also a small sample size. In NFL, you're always dealing with a small sample size, so I'm not really letting the fact that they haven't used him in the red zone yet alter my feelings toward playing Evan Ingram. The Bengals also given up the third most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to tight ends over the past 5 weeks. He just looks great to me. And even at what do we have the ownership? I should look at the updated ownership now. We've got him at 8% captain ownership, 35% util ownership. If those numbers hold, I would love him. The tools love him. We've got him optimal in the captain spot 11% of the time, optimal in the util 43% of the time. But you are right. Like, it's really hard to project ownership on a single game slate. So if he ends up getting steam, if he ends up, getting basically in line with our optimal odds, that wouldn't be that shocking to me. But still, the price is just so nice. It's really, really hard to not want to play a good amount of Ingram. I saw somebody in chat say he's a fade because he's going to get so much steam. I get it. If you want to fade him, certainly, and just hope that it doesn't work out. They haven't used him in the red zone so far this year. So if you want to fade him, be my guest.
Two things. One, like as far as the red zone talk, I haven't watched a ton of Jacksonville, but I do know like last week, I'm pretty sure he had a ball in the end zone that was either like knocked out of his hands or, one
That's
foot
right.
out of bounds, whatever it was. And I know
Lawrence
that
I think he overthrew him. I think it was just he was wide open and Lawrence just threw it past him.
And that shit happens all the time. Like, again, like that easily could happen tonight, but like, I think that's overblown that he's not getting the targets. And as far as like fading him, I do think there's a big difference here between like the 150 max $15 and like the $100 single entry. Like, I do think he comes significantly lower owned in the $15. People are much more risk averse in those, higher dollar contests. So they're going to play the best projected lineups. Ingram's going to be in those. In the $15, people are way more willing to get away from the field, whatever the reason may be. It's, not even just people entering single bullets and don't want to play him, but even 150 maxers are willing to get away from the field in a lot of their lineups. So I do think it's more of a concern the higher dollar you go to. Now, on the flip side of that, the higher dollar, like the higher owned guys in the higher dollar tournaments are usually the best plays on the slate. So like, that going in.
Yeah, exactly. He's a great point per dollar slate. He makes all the sense in the world. And those are often plays that like, you don't want to play them in large field GPPs all the time necessarily because they are the best players on slate. They're also going to get a lot of steam, and there's a lot of variance in the NFL. So those are the benefits to sometimes fading the best plays on the slate. What about the other side? I mean, so I think it's pretty straightforward with Evan Ingram on the Jags. I'm not playing any Luke Farrell. Brenton Strange is out. They called up coach's son Josh Peterson is active. I'm not going there tonight. The only Jags tight end I'm playing is Evan Ingram. Or is he also the only Jags tight end that you're playing?
He is, but I like Farrell more than like the sample Yeshivas guys. Like he's a little more expensive. I also like him more than Bigsby. He was on the field for like 30 to 40 plays last week. I can't remember the exact number, but only 8 passing plays. So he's a really thin play, but I think he's like in the pool of guys I would play if I were multi-entering. I'm not, so I'm not playing him. And then the Cincinnati side, really, really hard to get to the Cincy side for tight ends here. I think they've got like 4 guys right now that are playing tight end for them. Sample, Irv Smith, maybe only 3. And Hudson's the best pass catcher, but doesn't play a ton, and he's 4K. I get Hudson. I get any of them, but none of them are priorities for me. How about you?
So I'm glad that you brought up Luke Farrell, because I had not been thinking about playing any Luke Farrell. And just looking at his last 2 games, so just the past 2 weeks, he's only run 11 routes over the past 2 weeks. So that is 15% route participation. He has 7 targets on 11 routes run over the past 2 weeks, which is like
probably fluky, but I mean, again, it says something for a showdown slate at 2,600 where Jacksonville's the preferred side. Like, again, there's a lot of this slate is pretty top heavy. So again, for me, like, I wasn't trying to obviously like put you on him, but I wouldn't be taking him out of the pool in 150s, you know?
Yeah, I'm just debating whether I want him in my pool for 30 lineups. Because just looking at, he has 5 first read targets over the past 2 games, 1 end zone target. It's at least sort of interesting. I totally overlooked him earlier because just looking at the routes, like 15% route participation, not that exciting. But then you look at the 7 targets, it's like maybe I need to be considering Luke Farrell a little bit. I didn't even write him up earlier, but he is 4% ownership, at least somebody to consider.
Also, I guess like, not that you couldn't play them together, but there is a little bit of Evan Ingram leverage. Like if Luke Farrell catches a touchdown, like that's one less Evan Ingram can get, and they play the same position. So that's thin, but you could look at it that way.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. All right. And you say that you're not going to these Bengals guys because they're too spread out.
Yeah, I could see any of them coming. Like this is one where also if I were 150 maxing, I would definitely have these guys in my pool. With Hudson being the preferred option, he's the best pass catcher, but he doesn't play a ton. So, like, if you wanted to go with Sample or even Irv, who kind of looks to be out of favor there, I don't hate that either. But whenever you've got 3 guys like this, like, no thanks for me personally.
Yeah, so I am playing 30 entries tonight, so I'm not playing just one entry like you are. It is interesting though, like Irv has fallen out, but still 31.5% route participation over the past 2 games. He only has 3 targets in those games. But I still think like wouldn't be that shocking to see him pick up a few targets, pick up
He's only 1K
in the red zone. Yeah, and he's cheap. So do you have a favorite? If you were going to play a Bengals tight end, do you have a favorite there?
It's Irv, just because of everything you said. Like, I really don't want to spend. I like all the other guys at 4K, I think, over Hudson. Like, you could certainly argue him over D'Ernest, et cetera, but I'd rather play D'Ernest at 1K. Like, we've seen Irv do it before. I don't like him, but if you ask me who I'm going to choose between them, he probably shouldn't be the cheapest.
Yes, it's close between those 2 for me because you make a good point. Like, he is a quarter of the cost of Tanner Hudson, 1K to Tanner Hudson's 4K. Like Tanner Hudson is the one who's most likely to score fantasy points, but also takes a lot more to pay off 4K than 1K. Like a single 2-yard touchdown to Tanner Hudson doesn't necessarily pay off his price tag, whereas to Irv Smith, it probably does at 1K. Hudson he has 8 targets over the past couple games, 40% route participation. So he's a little bit more involved than Irv has been, but also like the route participation isn't that much higher. So it might just be a fluke that he's seen 8 targets to Irv's 2 over that span. So I think you're right. I think that Irv, if I were just going to play one, it would probably be Irv because of the price tag ultimately. None of them look great, but we're hurting for like really low owned players on this slate. Which as I said earlier, like that's part of the reason I'm going more towards Zay Jones and going to Tyler Boyd, because we're kind of hurting for those plays.
You're right, we are, but the nice thing about it is ownership's kind of flat. So like it's not like a Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts slate or Mahomes yesterday and Kelsey, where like those guys are going to be like 60 to 80% owned. It's flat here. Like Lawrence will be popular, obviously ETN too, but like they're not going to be like Mahomes level.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It is pretty flat here. And then we need to look at the lineup generator for a minute, but do you have any thoughts on kickers and defenses first?
I like McManus here.
Sorry, we're gonna look at the Sims. So sorry, Jordan, don't want to throw you off. Okay, you like McManus.
I do. I think Jacksonville obviously moves the ball here. A lot of leverage if they don't score touchdowns. He's also coming in with a ton of leverage. He is a kicker that has been good from a fantasy perspective, which is something I like to see. Again, this is a team that will I'd be very surprised if they can't move the ball well on Cincy. Just given it's not even that Cincy's defense is that bad. They're not great, but they're not awful. But you've got Trevor Lawrence and really good weapons. They'll be able to move the ball. Whether they'll be able to get it in the red zone is a different question. And if they can't, McManus could look really, really good here. I actually like him quite a bit, just based on everything I just said.
Malcolm Revamp just said, and let me make sure this is our most recent super chat. Malcolm says, Neil, who is the player to lock in on DK and FanDuel cash? I think you're probably playing, at least on DraftKings, you're playing Trevor Lawrence and Evan Ingram, I would think, for sure. In cash. Do you have any players to lock in on DraftKings or FanDuel?
I think that he said FanDuel because I was going to say DraftKings.
He said so that I answer for DraftKings. He asked for both.
Oh, okay. On DraftKings, I think it's honestly Lawrence, Ingram, and ETN. Like, okay. I think that those guys are priorities over any of the Cincy guys. Just in cash games, personally. Like, that's not how I'm playing tournaments, but in cash games.
Yep. And you said that for both sites?
I haven't really looked at yeah, for both sites.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense for both sites. We also got another super chat, which I think is just a comment, not a question. K Primo says, I like Higgins as captain tonight with Chase ups. I don't totally understand what this says, but he likes Higgins as a captain tonight. I don't believe that is a question. I think he's just stating that he likes Higgins. Yeah, I think Higgins, I mean, we went over Higgins as like he's not going to get a ton of ownership, I don't think. So from that perspective, I think definitely interesting to play some Higgins. Yeah, and then Malcolm wanted both sites. And Jordan, you can pull up the Sims if you have not already done so. Let me just look at FanDuel real quick so that I can answer that better. In terms of optimal odds, yeah, it's Lawrence. And these players are also, FanDuel things are fairly cheap tonight. I actually think the Jaguars defense is also a lock in cash games tonight. I think just looking at our top optimal odds, Trevor Lawrence, number 1, Jake Browning is number 2 at 1,300. So I think if you can fit him in, he makes sense. But Ingram is only 10,000 on FanDuel. Jaguars defense is 9,000. So I think Trevor Lawrence in the captain spot or MVP spot on FanDuel cash. Evan Ingram, Jaguars defense. If you can fit Browning in there, I would. But I'd say those are priorities for me in cash tonight. This is the rare, like I would play Jaguars defense, I think.
I'm going to take ETN out of the priorities on FanDuel. He's the most expensive by far. He's way more expensive than Lawrence. On DK, he's cheaper. So that changes things drastically.
Yeah, it definitely changes things a bit. All right. I am entering my lineups because we have 4 minutes left. Jordan, do you have? Yes, he does. He has it on the screen. So we are looking at the Sims right now. Let me just get my lineups in because I don't want to forget and have nothing in there because I don't have dummy lineups in currently. But you guys can see right now what looks like the best lineups on the screen, the top optimal odds lineups. So yep. Gotcha. So our highest exposed captain, and this is our top 150, Jordan. Okay, so out of 10,000 Sims, looking at our top 150 lineups in terms of expected ROI, Trevor Lawrence comes in at captain the most, and this is for DraftKings, followed by Travis Etienne, Evan Ingram, Calvin Ridley. So we get to 4 Jaguars before we get to Jamar Chase, our 5th most optimal captain, and then Jake Browning, Joe Mixon. Kind of interesting there. None of these are huge shocks, but these are all the players. They project really well. Kind of the players that you would expect to be the top optimal captains. Anything surprise you here, Bellman?
No, I mean, it just kind of goes to what I was saying earlier. It's all about the Jaguars. They're just going to project a lot better here.
Yeah. Can we see the top lineups again, Jordan? Because I didn't see it before. All right. Oh, yeah. And this is why it's better to do it the way you're doing it, because I cannot read what this says. Okay, thank you. Evan Ingram in the captain. So our top optimal has Ingram in the captain spot. Brandon McManus, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk. Cannot read what that says. And then Trevor Lawrence. Who is that before Trevor Lawrence? Joe Mixon and Trevor Lawrence. So just a lot of the top plays. Like none of these are super off the wall plays. This one's getting two dupes out of 10,000 lineups. So I would expect this lineup to be duplicated quite a bit in a very large field. But in this field of 10,000, only 2 dupes. So that is not too bad. Second lineup looks like a Trevor Lawrence captain lineup with several of his past Kirk, Ingram, he's got ETN, Zay Jones. So 3 of his pass catchers, not counting ETN, and then Tanner Hudson, the only comeback in this one from the Bengals. Kind of interesting there. Third one has ETN as the captain. So a lot of, yeah, it's kind of cool that our top three in terms of simulated ROI all have different lineups. So they all look a little bit different from each other. It's kind of nice to see that we're not just being pigeonholed to one type of build with one certain captain. So an ETN captain lineup there as well. Good to see that. Let me just check on chat, make sure I'm not missing anything. No super chats or anything we're missing. I think that we got to all of the super chats. So that is good to see. Yep,
Man,
really.
imagine how different this slate would be if Burrow was in.
It would be such a different slate because then suddenly you'd love all of the Bengals guys. Yeah, it would be. It is insane how much just the quarterback. Like there's really no other position that impacts the entire game as much as quarterback. It is pretty nuts.
And he's like an elite guy. I mean, I'm just thinking when he was healthy, it just beating Buffalo. They went into San Francisco and won.
We got a super chat, so let me answer real quick. I said him just that. Would you play two Jaguars pass catcher with no Trevor? Yes, absolutely. I think it's viable. On both sides, you're getting more points as the receiver than the quarterback. So yeah, sorry, just didn't want to interrupt, but we have just before lock. And now we are locked, so I had to jump in there. All right, Bellman, we have made it to lock. Nice job, Bellman. And by the way, I think Jordan threw it into chat. It's at least in the description. If you want to check out the Sims tool, which Jordan was just showing us on the screen, you can check that out. We've got we still got, lineup generator. If you want to see how the lineup generator works, that is the cheaper way to get access to our premium tool. It's just $14.95 per week. That you can find that in the link in the description of this video as well. We have a lot of great tools that you should check out if you haven't already done so. All right, Bellman, do you have any final words?
I don't.
No final words from Bellman. Are you coming to Arizona, Bellman?
That is TBD, to be determined.
All right. We'll see.
I gotta decide soon, though.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to convince Bellman to come to Arizona because he has a fantasy football world championship ticket. So he has, he's got a free food and drink all he wants if he comes. All right, that is going to do it for this show, though. I'll convince Bellman off air. Thank you guys very much for hanging out, watching with us. Hit that like button if you haven't already done so. Let's win some money tonight. Good luck.